Well, how's it going, friends? We're here today to have a conversation around the 9th step of the 12 steps of recovery. And really excited to get to do this today because sitting on either side of me are two friends of mine, but also two people who have had an incredible amount of influence and leadership in my life when it comes to my own personal recovery. So we want to just start off with saying hi to you and welcoming you to this conversation wherever you're coming from. And I want to let you know that if we've never met before, my name's Kenny. I'm one of the pastors here at Gateway. I'm our campus pastor for the Central Campus here at Gateway in Austin. But more importantly today, for this conversation especially, I'm a follower of Jesus who has been walking in the recovery community and in my own journey of recovery for the better part of about 15 years now. And I come out of a lot of years of drug addiction. I spent a lot of years addicted to crystal meth, and part of that addiction then led to a whole lot of other addictions around just sexuality and pornography. As it turns out, all of those things are linked to issues of anger and codependency and all kinds of control stuff in my life. And I'm really grateful for this road of recovery that I've been on with the Lord now for the better part of about 15 years, where I've just found an incredible amount of freedom, walking in recovery and continuing to live in the context of not only my discipleship to Jesus, but also the context of these 12 steps as a lifestyle. And so I'm going to let my friends introduce themselves as well. So we'll start with you, Jamie.
Yeah, thanks, Kenny. Well, hi, everybody. My name's Jamie Schwartz, and I'm really grateful to be here with you today and to be here with these guys who I admire very much. So just a little bit about me. I've been in recovery now for about almost 20 years. I actually started when I was a young mom. Started having kids pretty early, pretty young and immature, and in that time frame realized pretty quickly, those of you who have young children might relate, that I had an anger problem. And this went beyond a, kind of maybe normal anger to a higher level of anger and rage. And unfortunately, the people that it was affecting the most were the people closest to me, my children and my husband. And so it was, something you might be able to relate to, which is I really wanted to change. When I would lash out and rage on my children, and I would come down off of that, I would tell myself this, I'm never going to do that again. And unfortunately, I did. And so I kind of quickly realized, I don't think I can stop this. I had the desire to not do this anymore, but I continue to do it. And that's really when I started to look for help outside of myself. I spoke to a friend, confided in her, and she pointed me to the 12 steps. And that's really what began my journey. And I've been working the 12 steps ever since then and have found freedom in so many other areas of my life. Anger being one of them, but quite a few others. And I think the thing that I love most about being in recovery and being a part of recovery community is that I feel more and more like I am actually becoming who God created me to be and experiencing not only freedom, but really being able to thrive. So that's part of why I'm grateful to be here with these guys and having this conversation.
And then how do you serve here at Gateway too? Tell us a little about that.
So I actually am on staff at Gateway South. I am the Restore pastor. So I oversee Restore ministry there, and specifically with a passion for 12-step recovery. And we have a recovery at Gateway South that we do at most of our campuses, and so I kind of help run that, but also actually participate in it.
Thanks, Jamie.
Yeah.
What about you, handsome?
Thank you. Well, my name is Brian Brunson. I'm the Restore pastor here at our North Campus. And so I run all of our Restore ministries, much like Jamie does down south, here at our North Campus. I'm a grateful believer in Christ, and I came into recovery. I've been doing it for about 15 years as well. I came in recovery for a pornography issue initially. And what had happened was it had the potential of destroying my marriage. I had fought with it for years since I was at a really young age. And I too had the desire to stop, but I didn't know how. And I would continually try, and I would have times and links of what we call sobriety, but I would always end up going back for whatever reason. So I came into recovery and began to get help because of pornography and because of those types of issues in my life. But I stayed in recovery because I began to understand and learn that there were underlying issues to the actual act of pornography, and my seeking out that was just an escape. And I found out that I had issues with codependency and anger and people pleasing. And so I really had to investigate that more. And now God shows me something new every time I go through the 12 steps, but I stay in recovery not only because it's a lifestyle for me, but it's also an opportunity for me to give back for those that have given to me. And so I really am grateful to have the opportunity to be here today, to talk with my friends and with you about this journey called recovery, because I think the more of us that understand this process, the more freedom that each of us gets to walk in, and then we get to walk in freedom and community. And so I'm excited to be here.
Cool. Thanks, Brian.
Yeah.
And if you haven't caught on yet, there's a theme to this conversation. And one of the things we want you to hear right up front today is that we don't come before you or even before one another here as experts in any way. That the idea is really that we come as brothers and sisters who are in recovery together and have been in living in this community together now for quite a few years. And what's really cool is if we were able to do this in a way that I think would better almost represent the community we've been a part of, then on camera today, we'd be sitting here with potentially hundreds of other people who we've been walking with, some people that we've had the opportunity to lead, we've had the privilege of having some influence with in their life. But also, in the same way that I'm sitting here with people who have led me in recovery, there are others that could be on camera with us today who have very much led us in this process, people who have walked us on this journey. And so we really come here today as just three people who really feel like we found something very life-giving, something that has led us to what we believe is God's heart for freedom in our lives, for us to really live getting to love him and love others in a way that is not only brought a lot of light and life into our own lives, but into the world that we live in, that we get to also shine that light to others. Like Brian said, we get to talk to you today as part of us living out these 12 steps and living out recovery and serving others. So we're really excited to be having this conversation today. Now, that being said, I want to say that you're jumping in with this conversation online, and you could be jumping in from a lot of different places today. And we want you to know that we're very aware of that. Even as we start to talk a little bit about step 9, we're aware of the fact that a lot of you will be watching this video because you just watched Carlos do a message this past weekend on steps 8 and 9, and that's why we were gonna have a little more conversation around that. Some of you are currently in 12-step recovery. You're working through these steps with a sponsor or in a group of some sort where you're walking through some of this stuff. And some of you, this is brand new, right? Some of you are very much living actively in an addiction right now that is just heartbreaking in your life, something that you have wanted to stop, that you would love to not be a part of your life, but very much still is part. Some of you right now are dealing with some kind of a hang up or some kind of thing in your life that has you feeling just stuck in some way. A lot of you, when we talk about anger or control or things like pornography or addiction to drugs or alcohol or any number of things, food, television, your social media, your phone, there's so many things that this could be for you today. And we just want you to know, we know that. And you're so welcome. This is exactly the right conversation for you. This is not just for people who are on step 8, making their way into step 9. What we hope to do today is to give some insights into step 9 so that when you get to that point in your journey, or if that is where you are right now, you'll just have some tools that we've been given that we'd like to give back to you today that'll help you to make amends with people in your life, to just walk more and more towards this freedom that I believe that not only God desires for our lives, but has made a way for us to have through Jesus. And so you are exactly where you need to be. Like, picture a table here in front of us that doesn't exist. we want to sit at this table together today and have that conversation. I also want you to know that if we really do a good job today of talking about step 9 and what it looks like to work that step, well, then the first thing I want to do is I want to take a few minutes to make sure that we're all not going to experience too much vertigo in this conversation, right? Because one of the things that will have happened when you're starting to work step 9 and you're starting to work it with somebody else, right? Somebody who is working as a sponsor in your life, as a spiritual mentor, a person of wisdom who has experience of walking through these things together. Or if you're doing this in a group setting or in a step study, and you may be doing this here in Austin, here at Gateway, or you may be doing this somewhere around the globe right now in a different group and in a totally different setting. We want you to know that there's 8 other steps that you will have walked through in this 12-step journey before we would even start to talk about step 9. So it's really important to know that that might not be you today. So this will feel a little daunting, like, wait, I don't feel qualified or ready maybe to jump right into step 9. And that's exactly the way it should feel. That's okay. You're right in the right spot right now. Because when you're working through these 12 steps, some of what will have happened is in step 1, you will have admitted your powerlessness over the effects of all this separation from God in your life. You will have admitted this unmanageability in life. And you will have, again, done that with someone walking alongside of you. And at that point, came to realize that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. In step 3, we made a decision to turn our lives and our wills over to the care of that God as we understand him. And that's really important. Those first 3 steps are a beginning to this journey that are really important. Those 3 steps then get us ready to, in step 4, we get to a place where we made a searching and moral inventory of our lives. It's a big task. It's a big step. And it's not something that we would ever advise doing alone, but to do, again, with somebody walking alongside of you, a trusted person of wisdom, a sponsor, or a group leader in that setting. Once you've done that inventory of your life, then in step 5, we've admitted to God and to ourselves and to another human being, someone else that we trust, the exact nature of our wrongs and the things that have been part of this brokenness that we've experienced in life. You get to step 6 and we're entirely ready now to have God remove these defects of character in our lives. And in step 7, we humbly ask him to do so, to remove these things from our life. And then as Carlos talked about just this past Sunday, that gets us to step 8. And in step 8, we get to this place where we make a list of the people who we've harmed, and we became willing to make amends to those people. And then in step 9, which is where we are today, we made direct amends to such people, except when to do so would injure them or others. And that's step 9. So if you don't already know, now you know. This is quite an endeavor that we've taken on to get to the place of step 9 in the 12 steps. There's a lot of amazing and hard work that you will have done in that. And the thing I want to make sure we underline before we jump any further into the conversation is you may have noticed each one of these steps has a tense to them. And what I mean by that is these are written in a past tense that is reminding us that in step 1, right, we've admitted something, right? We've admitted our powerlessness, the unmanageability of our life. And you're ready to start working step 2 once you've admitted that, once you've come to grips with that. And it's a thing that has happened, and then it gets us ready for step 2, where we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Because it's only at that point that in step 3, you would get to a place where you made a decision to turn your life and your will over to the care of God, and so on and so forth. You see how that works. And so I know it's the heart of all 3 of us today for you to know. This is something that I had said to me this way one time earlier in my recovery. It's about trusting the journey. It's about trusting God and trusting the person who is leading you through this, the person that you're walking with. all along the way. Most people that I know who talk about trying the 12 steps and it didn't work for me, or yeah, I did that once and it didn't change anything. Most people, I'll try not to talk in absolutes here, that would be careless, but most people that I know, at least in my experience, what they're really telling you is that they kind of jumped into this at some point and may have taken it very seriously, at least to a point. But at some point in that steps journey, maybe it was around step 4, or maybe it was right before step 5, or maybe it was right before step 9 that we're talking about today. For one reason or another, we just kind of get off course. We stop doing the work. We kind of let it go. We get frustrated. Maybe we let some old addictions, some old behaviors back into our life, whatever might happen. And we want you to know, if that's you today, for me, it was really my 3rd journey through the 12 steps, working with just the right person, that was the most life-changing journey through the steps that I've ever had. But for me, it was the 3rd time working through those steps that I really found, I think, a fullness of this freedom for the first time. And so if you've ever tried to start this before, if it's something that you've kind of got your feet wet in before and you got frustrated along the way, or you stopped doing them, or if you've seen other people who maybe said, hey, I'm in the 12 steps, or I go to AA or NA, or I go to a thing at my church that is about this, and you haven't seen in their life the fruit that you think you'd want to see in your own, don't let that discourage you from your own personal journey here. Because I know for the 3 of us, we really do believe that God has just incredible things for you personally, that he really does give through this journey, through working through these steps. It's not about a magic pill. It's not about 12 steps to happiness or 12 steps to making the world do what the world's supposed to do. It's actually this journey that creates a new lifestyle for us, where in a world that is very broken, in a world that does come at you sideways, in a world that, as it turns out, doesn't usually agree with what you think it should do all the time, and people don't usually do what we think they should do all the time, we now have this, we have the tools, we are equipped to walk in the freedom that God has given us, and to respond to life in a way that we don't get tanked. We don't have to get sidelined, and we don't have to have our legs taken out from under us every time that there is a disagreement or we hit a bump in the road. But we are more equipped to hit those bumps and to take them in stride. And these are things that, for me, guys, it wasn't until about my mid-30s in my life that I even started to explore. And so here I am today, about 49 years old or so, and I'm telling you, the last 15 years of my life have been the best 15 years of my life, because I've been living in this community and it's with people like the ones I'm getting to sit with today. So we're going to talk a little bit about step 9. We want you to know that you're welcome here, like we've said. We also want you to know that the idea today is we're going to tell you a little bit about just what step 9 is and how this can work in your life. And we want you to feel really equipped to work this step at just the right time when you've arrived at that point for you. So first thing I want to do is I want to turn over to my friend Jamie here, because Jamie, I would love for you to just take some time to talk to us about what step 9 is in your personal experience in recovery, but also as a leader, as a sponsor, as a pastor, and all the experience you have in that. What is step 9, and how can we best understand that today?
Yeah, absolutely. So step 9, pretty simply put, is making amends. But what that entails can actually be a lot more complicated. And as we've discussed, can produce some really beautiful fruit in our lives, but can also be actually harmful if not done well or done for the right reasons. So part of our goal talking about this today is really to set you up well. And so talking about what it is, I think is really important, because it gives you more of a framework to kind of approach this from. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what this step is, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what it isn't. So if I start just kind of with the basic, I think starting with the heart of this step is really peace. And that's really the foundation of all 12 steps. So if you go back to the foundation, the first 3 steps, it's really about peace with God. And then as you transition from step 3 into step 4, you transition into starting to focus on peace with yourself. So those are 2 very important parts of the process. I think of it kind of like building a house. You start with the foundation. Everybody knows that. It's a very important part of building a house. You don't start with the frame. You have to have a good foundation. And in the same way, the 12 steps kind of function like that. Steps 1, 2, and 3 are your foundation. And then when you get into steps 4, 5, 6, and 7, you're building on that foundation. So when you get to step 8 and 9, this is really where you're turning from your focus on peace with God and restoration in that relationship, and peace with yourself and restoration with yourself. And that starts to then translate outward. So think of it like learning how to live from the inside out instead of from the outside in. When you're operating at a place or a level of peace, and think about peace as restoration, things being restored into a place that they were designed to be. So when you experience peace in a relationship, that's really what you're experiencing, is something functioning as it was meant to be. So when you think about peace with God, it's like restoring that relationship to what it was meant to be, restoring your relationship with yourself to what it was meant to be. There's a reason why steps 8 and 9 are steps 8 and 9. They don't come first for a reason, because it's actually kind of a prerequisite to working steps 8 and 9 that you would have actually worked the other steps, that you would be operating in a level of peace with God and a level of peace with yourself before you start to branch out to try to restore relationships with others. So that's the first thing I would say, is this is about restoration and it's about peace. But it's necessary that you're doing it in the right order, because it really does affect the heart with which you come to this step. And I think that's a little bit more of what I want to talk about, because when you think about making amends, that can look like going to a person, and what maybe we all might be a little bit more familiar with is apology. That thing that our parents might have made us do when we were kids. It's like, say sorry to your sister, or your brother or whatever. And you learn how to do that. And it's kind of like, this is what we're supposed to do, and we do it. But actually the work that we're doing in steps 8 and 9 is going deeper than just a simple apology. We're actually getting to a place where we're ready to really take responsibility for our actions, for our lives, and the impact that those actions have had on other people. So this is what we're doing in steps 8 and making our list. We're actually looking over our life. And the good news is if you've worked step 4, you've already started that list. And so you don't come to step 8 having to start over. You're actually able to pull from the list that you've already made. But you're looking over the people that you've wronged in your life, and you're becoming willing to actually go to them and seek to make that right. So that's a part of what we're doing. But I think it's also kind of important to talk about what we're not doing. So taking responsibility for our actions. In recovery, one of the languages that we kind of tend to use is the image of my side of the street. So what am I responsible for and what am I not responsible for? And I think when we're talking about what step 9 is and making direct amends is, we definitely have to notice what we're responsible for. So we can take responsibility for what we've done and how it's impacted other people. And we can go to those people and we can seek, as far as it is by us, to try to live at peace with them. And so we can seek and desire restoration. But there are some things that are out of our control, that are really their side of the street. And that comes down to reconciliation. So while we can do our part to try to live at peace and make right our wrongs, what we can't do is force reconciliation. And that's up to the person that we've wronged. We also can't actually force somebody to forgive us. And so when we look at what this is, it is us taking responsibility for our actions. It is us recognizing where we've wronged others and noticing and taking responsibility for the impact of our wrongs. It is us seeking to make right those wrongs by going to that person and making a direct amends. It is us also actively working the steps so that we're not continuing to live in those same patterns that caused those wrongs to begin with. What it's not is us trying to force or control reconciliation. That person is on their own journey, and they may not be in a position where for one reason or another they're ready to forgive. They may not be in a position where they're ready to reconcile. And honestly, sometimes it's not even, reconciliation isn't even necessarily possible in some situations. But that being said, I think that the piece of this that I really want to make sure I'm communicating is that this isn't something you want to take lightly. The work that you do leading up to this is important because why you're doing it matters. Your motive in coming into this step really matters, because honestly, one of the things that I've seen happen in this step is if you go to make amends from a self-serving, selfish motivation, you want to maybe make yourself feel better. Maybe you're really burdened by something and you just want to get it off of your chest. If you think about, well, who's at the center of that motivation? Oftentimes it's you. And we can actually do more harm in this process when we're going for the wrong motivation. If you've worked the steps leading up into this point, some of the things you've done is actually own your part, and you've inventoried that. And you've, like Kenny said, you've also noticed themes of potential character defects, and you've addressed those things. So when you come to this place, having done the other steps, you're usually in a position where you're humble and you're ready. And when you're in that position, you're usually centering your motivation around God and a desire to live at peace with Him and live at peace with others, and a love for other people, rather than selfishness or self-centeredness, which is really kind of what leads most of us into recovery, is this acknowledgement that we are naturally very selfish and self-centered people, but we don't have to be. And I think that's part of what I love about this work, is that it's actually helping us to be vessels of God's peace, vessels of restoration. So when done right, this step can be beautiful and it can be powerful. But when done for the wrong reason, it can be actually more damaging. And that's one of the things that you want to be aware of going into this step. So you don't take it lightly, and you don't want to be afraid, although you will need courage to do this step, but you do want to take it seriously. I think that's important.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah.
So, to someone who's really brand new to the idea of recovery, or maybe just even in the series that we're in at Gateway right now, maybe this is someone who's just starting to get their feet wet in the idea of the 12 steps. When you talk about the idea that working this ninth step or making amends with someone doesn't always equate to receiving forgiveness from somebody or reconciliation actually happening, right? For that person who maybe doesn't know what we know about the fullness of the steps yet, what would be the benefit of Jamie making an amends where there isn't any reconciliation? How does that help in your life? What difference does that make then?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that if you're thinking that way, I would just say, first of all, again, going back to motivation, this is about you taking responsibility for you. If you think about it, again, going back to kind of the house analogy, you're kind of in a remodeling phase up to this point. And you may have had some areas or rooms in your house that maybe you kind of avoided or stayed away from and didn't really want to address. But at this point, and that's already been happening in step 6 and 7, you're confronting things that need to be confronted in order that they can actually be fully remodeled or restored or renewed. And so you're recognizing that there are certain things that you can do. And the serenity prayer talks about this. If you guys, I'm sure you've probably heard it, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I think that's part of what we're realizing in step 9. If I want to move towards restoration, and as far as it is by me living at peace with others, then here's what I can do. The thing I can't do is force other people's response, force them to be in the place that I may desire for them to be. And that's not wrong. Having a desire for somebody to forgive you is not wrong, but having an expectation that they will is going to probably lead you to disappointment and even ulterior motives that would be more self-serving. So it's okay to go into this step, I think, with a desire for people to forgive you, but being cautious and careful about turning that into an expectation, I think, would be important. And there is freedom. I like to say to the people that I sponsor is a successful amends isn't necessarily amends that ends with somebody forgiving you. A successful amends is when you've taken responsibility, owned part, and have peace with them. And you've done what you can do, and the rest of it is between them and God, and you can leave it there. And I think that's a part of being kind of this transition. Much of what's led us to recovery causes us to be destructive forces. We may be kind of more destructive in our own patterns of life, or maybe destructive in our relationship. Part of what being a vessel of God's peace or an instrument of God's peace is actually being constructive, building, restoring. And so you can do your part of that work, and then you have to leave the rest of that to them. And I think that's part of the beauty of where you can walk away from that, is knowing that as far as it is by you, you're seeking to live at peace with that person. And that's a really powerful place to be, because you're doing what you can and surrendering what is out of your control.
Yeah, that's so good.
Yeah.
That's so important too. I know that for me, the thing that comes up when you're talking about that is how important that was to just come to the reality that there were many people on my list of amends that were people that I was able to come to a place through the steps and through being led well through the steps, where I was able to offer forgiveness, authentically offer it in my heart to somebody, to give them forgiveness for ways that maybe they had harmed me along the way, but also to have peace around not receiving that back from them. And as someone who is very much a people pleaser, part of the brokenness of my character defects, we talk about it as codependency and people pleasing and stuff like that. It is living a life where I'm always trying to make sure that you're okay, that you approve of me, that you like me, that you whatever. And the same would be true with forgiveness, which is why I think it's so important what you said about the journey through the steps that gets us ready for step 9, because without working steps 1 through 8, none of us would be ready to make an amends where we could have peace, even if you don't offer the forgiveness back. I know for me, that's in my brokenness, that's sort of my nightmare. I need you to forgive me, right? I've made an amends, but that's not how it works. So that's really, really helpful. And I hope that's helpful to you, because I know it's a messy thing that we're talking about today. And for all the examples we could give, every single one of you has sort of a lifetime of examples probably that's spinning around in your own mind right now, in the real life examples. So it's really, really cool.
Yeah. Can I say one other thing? Because it made me think of, something that might be helpful is step 8. Whenever we're working step 8 and preparing our list, one of the things that I think is also really important in that step is preparing our hearts. So this kind of goes back to the motivation piece I was talking about, which is, making sure that your heart's ready and in a good place to make those amends. And one of the things I think is most important, when you go to make amends, you're not going to confront people who've wronged you. You're going to seek out people that you've wronged. It doesn't mean that there isn't a place in your life sometimes where those confrontations or conversations need to be had in relationships where you have been wronged by people. It just means that that's not what owning your responsibility and making amends is. And so when you are working step 8, a big part of that is actually looking at the people that have wronged you and becoming willing to forgive them. And that forgiveness piece, I think, can be really huge, because it is, like I think you were saying, setting you up and helping you make sure that your heart and your motives are in the right place. But it's really hard to go into an amends conversation holding things against people and wanting or desiring their forgiveness. It's like something within us, there's a conflict where we are recognizing something hypocritical, and it makes it difficult for us to actually make an authentic amends. And so doing that, kind of that pre-work in step 8, that heart work of being willing to forgive those people who've wronged us, sets us up well to then have the courage to go and talk to people directly who we've wronged. And when you think about the piece of forgiveness, I think it's also important just to mention that we're talking about a way of life. So a lot of times in recovery, what happens is you make the decision to forgive somebody, but then maybe a day or two later or a week later, the thought of the wrong comes up. And it starts to kind of stew, and before you know it, you're kind of resenting or angry at that person again. And then that leaves you feeling like, well, did I actually forgive? And I think that one of the things that is worth distinguishing is that forgiveness is actually something that you walk out every day. It's a perspective, it's a way of life, and it's rooted in the fact that you have been forgiven. What it's cost God to forgive us through Jesus is the motivation that we need to be willing to forgive others. And I think that helps set us up well as we come into step 9 and prepare to make amends.
Yeah, so good. It's great. Yeah, and so get this other guy sitting over here too. I kind of forgot he was behind me here. So Brian, I'd love for you to take a few minutes, and I feel like we have some framework for what step 9 is. But as it turns out, there's actually healthy ways to work this step, and probably some really unhealthy ways to do so. And so could you take a few minutes and further help us in our journey, and also help anybody who's tuning in on this to know what does it look like to actually walk through step 9 at the right time in your recovery? What does that look like?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I think that one of the things that's really important is I appreciate the fact that you setting up and recognizing that there are 8 steps. I love the analogy of building a house, Jamie, because I think the reality is this, is if those 8 steps don't undergird the 9th step, the reality of it is you really have the potential for it to all come down like a game of Jenga. And maybe that won't happen, but the reality of it is they were built the way they were created for a reason. I love that the steps were created off of the Beatitudes, because I think when you look in the Bible and you see Jesus standing up for the first time with the crowd and literally saying, if you're going to live life, live it this way. And so I love that we can look back and see that these steps are built on a biblical basis that come from an eternal God. And so I know for me personally that if I'm not stepping through steps 1 through 3 on a daily basis, that I'm a liability for myself and for those around me.
That's so true.
And so I want to kind of talk through this idea of making amends with a little bit of my story so that maybe I can help you understand what the application looks like. And it's a little different for everyone. All of us have probably a little bit of things that we've learned along the way that we've potentially used with sponsees and things that we were taught that were really helpful. And so I'm going to share with you some of the things that I do and some of the things that I've done. And then I'd love to have you all have your input in it as well. So many years ago, because I'm around the same age as Kenny, many years ago, right.
Yeah.
Many years ago, I worked for a residential plumbing company. And I was a young kid who wasn't walking with Christ, who was really selfish and was looking out for himself. But this company took me under their wing. I came on as a laborer, but it wasn't long before they were teaching me the trade of plumbing. And I learned out in the field, and I also worked in the office, so I had an opportunity to learn so many different aspects of that business. Along the way, I took some things without the owners knowing, I, in my mind, borrowed some things from them. In the real world, we call that stealing. But in my addict brain, I found a way to rationalize it. And of course, the committee that was in my head agreed with me. But there came a point in time in that journey of working for the company that I began to feel a draw to go back to school and finish my engineering degree that I had started. And interestingly enough, around that same time, I started hearing God. And it kind of weirded me out a little bit because I really hadn't spoken to God since high school. And I'd stopped drinking already, so I knew it wasn't the booze talking to me. But I didn't know what to make of it. And I really wanted to follow my dreams and my desires, not what anything that God wanted for me or anyone else, because I knew what was best for me, or so I thought. So I went back to school after I'd been working with them for a little over, somewhere within a year. I went back to school, got back in, and before long, some events happened in my life and things just fell apart. And I hit my knees. In recovery, we call that hitting our bottom. And in that moment of hitting my bottom, I looked up, and the only one that was there was God. And in the miraculous way that he can, he opened my heart and my ears and my eyes to what he had done for me. And in that moment, I began to realize that my life was completely unmanageable. And I needed help. And so I started following Christ and getting help and walking through this process. And in that process of stepping through the journey of the people that were involved in my life, I realized I had some amends I needed to make. And I made a plan, got a list, and on that list was this plumbing company. I was terrified. I did not want to go back to the owners and say, hey, guess what? I stole from you. But I knew in my heart I had to do it. That it wouldn't be right between me and God until I was right between me and this company and this owner. And so I gathered up the things that I had not used, and I put together a plan, gathered up things, and I drove an hour to the office of this plumbing company. And the whole time there, I was praying for God to use what he'd done in my life in this moment and allow me to take responsibility and to identify the things that I'd learned about myself, about my selfishness, about my greed, about the character defects that we talked about earlier, that I began to realize in my own life.
And hey, Brian, by the way, I've been on the wrong side of the law a couple times in my life for sure. It seems to me too, there may be a little bit of a chance there could be some earthly consequences here too, right?
I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah.
And I definitely am going to get to that in a second, because I think that that's key and even what Jamie said earlier is, we do this process. It's because of what Christ has done for us. Now, there's importance of knowing when it's the right time and when it's not the right time. And I want to get to that because that's a key point in this process. When I showed up at the office, the owner wasn't there. She was at her house. And so I called to say, hey, can I stop by? And she's like, oh, absolutely, come on out. And so I left the supplies that I had taken at the warehouse and I drove out to the house. And I'm walking up to the door and I can feel my heart just pounding. And what's crazy is I was terrified, but I had a peace that I couldn't explain because I wasn't in control. I knocked on the door and the owner opened it up and she welcomed me in. She was excited to see me. She was like, Brian, it's been so long. How are you doing? It's so great to see you. Are you coming back to work? And I'm sitting there going, no, you're making this so much worse. I was thinking, what I have to tell you is going to be devastating. And at the same time, I'm thinking, I could go to jail for this. She could call the police. And then I was thinking, maybe I don't need to say anything. We seem to be good right now. and the Lord said, no, you're here to do something. You need to do what you came to do. And so I sat down and I began to talk with her and I said, I need to share with you some things about my life. When I worked for your company and for you, my life was out of control and unmanageable. And I hurt a lot of people. And one of the people I hurt was you. And I'd like to share that with you now. And so then I went on to explain to her that in that season, that I worked for them, that I'd taken things from the company and I'd stolen from her. Supplies that I was going to be using. And I went on to talk about how it was me and the things that happened in my life and the aspects of what I had done to hurt and harm her. And I just said, I can only imagine hearing this and really feeling betrayed and feeling like you've been taken advantage of. And I was broken because I really had a really good relationship with this owner. And I just said, I just want you to know, I made a lot of mistakes and I hurt a lot of people and you being one of them. And I just want you to know that I am sincerely sorry for what I did to you. That you had trusted me, that you had invested in me, and I repaid you by stealing from you. So I said, I dropped off the supplies I did not use at the shop, and I have every intention to repay you for anything that I used. And if that's not enough, I'll do whatever needs to be done to make this right. I would love to ask for your forgiveness, but I don't want to put that on you until hopefully someday you're ready. But in whatever I can do, I want to make this right. So what do I need to do? And then I just shut up. And that's the part, our part. That's the recognition of what we've done. Because walking in unmanageability, walking in chaos, we are going to be a liability, not only to ourselves, but to those around us. So I want to talk a little bit about the how. How do we do this? What's the process of having worked all these steps and getting to 9 and then getting ready. So first and foremost, you've heard us talk about sponsors or mentors, and that's so important, is to have someone on your side that's walking you through, coaching you in this process. Because if you don't have that, like Jamie shared, you're liable to do something that could harm that person or other people that either love them or love you.
And probably set yourself way back in your own journey as well.
Yeah, that's a great point, Kenny. You know, the reality of it is the desire to make amends when you start feeling the conviction is to run out and just make amends with everyone. But you need the wisdom of someone that's objective and can say, that's not a wise decision. So that's why, to start out with, using our fourth step, like Jamie talked about, we make a plan. Okay? Who am I going to make amends to first? And we make that plan with our sponsor. Who am I going to make amends to first? Who's going to be later? And who is someone that I probably will never face-to-face do an amends with? Plans are increasingly important. And I say this all the time. I say, with those I sponsor, I say, every aspect of this journey has to be bathed in prayer. We have to invite Christ into the process and the Holy Spirit into the process to lead us and guide us.
Yeah, step 2, right? We came to believe a power greater than ourselves could restore us.
That's right.
And to not continually invite him into the process every step of the way probably lacks wisdom then at that point. So I love what you're saying. It's really important.
And that's why the buildup is so important. Because if I have not been practicing that, then it's very easy for me to run out to fix what hurts in me, not realizing that those are wrong motives.
Yeah.
And I do it in my own wisdom instead of the wisdom of Christ and someone else. And so we make a plan to get together with my sponsor, and we start walking through as I submit to God, okay, Lord, who is first? And one of the things that we need to remember is as best we can, we're making direct amends to those that we've harmed. Sometimes that's not possible, as Jamie mentioned, and that's okay. But it's also important for us to have that experience of a mentor or a sponsor with us, because it's really easy in our desire to go out and make amends to actually cause harm. And so for instance, if I had an affair and I wanted to go make amends with the person I had an affair with, that may not be the best decision, because I could find in that action of reconnecting with that person, I may hurt my own spouse if I'm married, or I could hurt their spouse or cause pain and suffering to that person. And so that's why it's so important to have someone who has wisdom and hopefully has been through the process before you to walk you through. And I would say that for each of us, we probably have had those moments where our sponsors have said something and we've gone, oh, I hadn't thought of it that way.
Sure.
And so after we've created that plan, what I will do with my sponsees is I actually ask them to write out their first amends, because I want them to think it through. And when you write it out, there's something that happens between the head and the pen that just is therapeutic in that process. And as they write it out, then we'll get together when they're finished and have them read it to me. And I'm listening, because I, as a sponsor, have walked them through the 4th step, the 5th step. I know their defects of character. I know where they're going to minimize or maybe justify a little bit something, or maybe avoid it. You know, maybe I'm going to use some acronyms, or I'm going to use something instead of just describing it for what it is. And so I will help them kind of edit that letter so that they can go back and have it well prepared for when it's time to go make to make an amends. And once that's done, then comes the setting up the time with the person that I need to make amends to. Now, when I get to that point, I'm generally counseling my sponsees about the different types of amends. So whether it be intangible or tangible, intangible has more to do with relational wounds, like I've hurt someone relationally, and it doesn't have as much to do with tangible stuff like money or goods or things that I've stolen or that I need to repay, a debt that I owe in that fashion. And regardless of which one it is, an easy acronym that I like to use is it's something that comes out of the region material that we use at North, and it's RUT, R-U-T, ABC. So R-U-T, ABC. RUT, the R stands for realize the wrong. Okay, what have I done? And that comes from the 4th step. We get that information as we're walking through the 5th step with our sponsor or our mentor. Those things come out. U is understand the hurt. What have my actions done to the person that I've harmed? Can I put myself in their shoes and let myself sit in that? I think that's so crucial in the process, because if I can't put myself in their shoes, then it's really hard for me to empathize or understand the impact of my actions. I think that you've heard both of my friends here say responsibility, taking responsibility is vital in this process, and that's what the T stands for. I have to be willing to own up to my side of the street. And then A, which hopefully comes in the process, but as you heard Jamie say earlier, it's not an expectation, but it is at some point to ask for forgiveness. Now, this is going to look different for everyone, and it really, if you've not done the steps before and the humility is not there, then you're going to expect instead of ask. It's an invitation, not a demand. And then the BC is behavior change. The process of what's changing in my life and what am I going to do to rectify or to make right what I've done that was wrong. And in some cases, like Jamie even mentioned, that may not be possible.
Yeah.
You may not be able to do that.
And that person of wisdom, the person you're walking with, is so vital in that case. Because I know for me, I needed someone to help me know the difference in sometimes. Again, the controlling aspect of my brokenness wants to make sure, that these people are all okay, or that there has been forgiveness, or that I've done everything I could. And it really takes that person of wisdom sometimes to go, you've done what you can do, right? And it's okay now. You got to, part of your recovery now is to let go of him, let God do the work now that needs to be done, because this is sort of way out of your hands now, which I'm going to be blind to probably a lot of the time, but the person I'm walking with can help me see that. Right?
Yeah, I love that you said that, Kenny, because remember, our responsibility is for us to try, and we do our side, and then we leave it to God.
Yeah.
I'm not responsible for how the other person responds. I'm not responsible for what might come of that. It's our job to try and do what we've come to do to make amends, and then let God do what God's going to do. When it comes to the tangible side of things, where we need to repay our reparations for what we've done, we need to come prepared for that. What does that look like for us? Whether it's us bringing money to repay for what we've done, or it's us willing to have a plan in place to hand that person to say, hey, I'd love to work this off if you would let me. And at times some of it is saying, and if that's not enough, what else would you like me to do?
I hope my parents aren't listening to this right now, because I could possibly work this off. Love you, Mom and Dad. Go ahead, Brian. Sorry.
Well, you brought up a point earlier, Kenny, that I think is really important to bring up here and it's why it's so important for a sponsor to be involved, because there are some situations that you may not need to step into and make amends because they could lead to things that are detrimental.
Yeah.
Now, I take time with my sponsees and we really pray through things. And there have been things that people have faced that could put them in jail, and we move forward with amends. But I would say I would not always advise that. It's a case-by-case situation. And it's also, as we listen to the Lord and listen to our sponsor, it's important for us to allow those voices in our life to be the guiding light for us, so that we are not moving on instinct, but rather on the principles of the process of the program that are built on the Word of God. And hopefully the Holy Spirit that we have in us will lead us appropriately. And we'll be able to hear what our sponsors are saying and recognize the truth in what they say. And then the parts I love about this too is being willing to share what God's done in our lives.
Yeah.
In some situations you're going to walk in and it may not turn out well. Just saying that. But other situations we need to be ready to share what's happened in our lives. What's different that would make us to come back and confess and be vulnerable. And I know for me, that has been some of the most amazing experiences of my recovery journey, is being able to share the freedom that I now have because of Christ to others who are now going, okay, I don't know who you are, because you're not the one I knew years ago or whenever. And so, again, we try and we trust the rest of God. And then once that amends is complete, I always have my sponsees call me and we talk through it, because I'm praying for them while they're making the amends.
That's great.
Because we're a team. We're a community. You don't have to do this alone. As I sat there in the living room of the owner of this company, I'll call her Miss Maggie, I explained to her, I'll pay whatever needs to be paid. I'll do whatever needs to be done to make this right. And she looked at me and she just said, Brian, it was such a pleasure having you work for us. I liked you then, and I like you now. Every time. She said, we may be over trusting as owners, but we believe that everyone's worthy of trust. And I think in this situation, we'll just call it even, because what you're doing takes a lot of courage.
Gosh, I wish Miss Maggie would have been the judge in a couple of my court cases. That would have been so good.
And then she asked me, so why did you come back? And that gave me that opportunity to share what had been going on in my life, what Christ had done and set me free from. And this process that I was doing of making amends to those I'd harmed. And she just said, you know what? I feel really good about saying we're even because I know that God's going to use you to show grace to somebody else somewhere down in the future. Now, not all amends work out that way.
They sure don't. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, yeah.
I've had some that have not gone that way. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important for you to know that. But again, it is up to us to do our part. We try and we leave the rest up to God. And in doing that, God is glorified in the process. And hopefully out of it comes healing. Certainly to ourselves, but hopefully to those that we are confessing to as well.
It's a good word, man. Yeah, that's great. And I was sitting here thinking about a couple things. One of them is there might be some of you right now who are listening to this and thinking like, so I hear a lot of talk about, the Lord. I hear these guys talking about the way that, they interacted or are interacting with God or the Holy Spirit or Jesus, like in the midst of all this. And some of you, I'm very sure today, are like, well, here's the problem. I don't have a relationship with God. Seems like that's a pretty vital thing in each of their stories, and yet I don't have that yet today. And I want to just remind you, I'll take you back to what we said at the beginning. We're talking about working the 9th step of recovery today. We're talking about making amends in the context of being about 75% of the way through a journey through the 12 steps. And it's really important because it's in the beginning. Both Jamie and Brian have both made this point, and I think it's worth making one more time. Those first 3 steps are so important in this journey. And if that's not something you've experienced yet, that is a time that you are going to engage with who the creator of the universe is. You're going to get to engage with what relationship you have or don't have with him and what that looks like in your life. And so if you listen again to, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore our lives, right? Restore us to sanity in step 2. And then in step 3, we also made a decision to turn our lives and our wills over to the care of God, of that creator, of this power that is greater than ourselves. And then there's a relationship, even if it's a brand new relationship for you, that starts to grow in the midst of this process. And so if you don't have a relationship with God, if you're very skeptical about all of that, if you're new to the idea of faith, the Bible, God, any of that, first of all, again, we're so glad you're here because here at Gateway that we love knowing that we all sit around this table together and all of us are in process. We all have more questions than answers, and we welcome not only the doubts that you bring, but we really believe that we have a God who does the same, who would rather be in a conversation with you around the doubts and questions you have than not be in a conversation with you. He just cares and loves us that much. So I want to also say this. There's a couple next steps that we'd like to recommend to you today as we just wrap up this conversation. And one of them is just to remember that we're doing this conversation in kind of in tandem, in supplement to a series that's happening right now at Gateway where we've been teaching through the 12 steps. And so we did sort of a 2-part series, the first part called The Unmanageable Life, where we talked through the first 5 steps of recovery. Currently right now, we're in the second part of that series called The Restored Life. And we're going to be making our way through 6 through 12 of the series. And again, if you're catching this conversation as we're posting it, you might have just heard Carlos, our North Campus pastor, do a teaching on steps 8 and 9, and we still have some more to go. So a couple things to know about that is, number 1, the 9th step isn't the end of the journey either. And there's more that we're going to talk about in the series, and there's a lot more work that happens in your own recovery in steps 10, 11, and 12. 12 being sort of the ultimate ellipses in our lives that just reminds us that this is a journey and a lifestyle. It's a rhythm of life that we want to start to live in. It's not a sprint to a little finish line. And also we want you to know that as a next step, we want to encourage you that you can go to gatewaychurch.com. You can find all of these messages there or on our app. All of all the teaching and stuff will live there, and you can always go, and we encourage you to go watch those if you haven't yet. But also go on there and look into the different opportunities you have to jump into recovery. Across our campuses, we have all kinds of opportunities for you to get into a group in recovery. We have restore classes that might be a great next step for you. And the bottom line is, we would say this on any given Sunday, and we're going to say it here today, is we really do believe that every single one of us three included today, has a next step to take. And we want to encourage you to prayerfully or carefully take a next step with us today, and go on to the website, see where there's a group for you. Make sure that you're caught up on the series. And we're really praying that for anyone who would be part of this conversation, that all the people in our Gateway community, wherever you're jumping in, are going to really find hope, are going to find peace, are going to find a better way to live, like Brian said. And also ultimately, our prayer, our not so secret prayers, that all of us would just find life in Jesus together. And so we're so grateful that you would join us in this time. And Jamie, I'm going to get in trouble right now, I think, but I was thinking a great way to end this would just be for you to lead us in the Serenity Prayer. Would you be willing to do that?
I would love to.
Let's do that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
God, grant us the serenity to accept the things that we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Living one moment at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace, taking, as Jesus did, this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that you will make all things right if we surrender to your will, so that we may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you forever in the next. Amen.
Amen. Thanks. And thank you. Appreciate you guys.